Hey, Jeff. Can you hear me? Hey, morning. Hi, Rosemary. Morning. Nobody has their screens on. I guess
There we go.
people are still waking up.
Ah,
Well, I've been up since 2:30, Rabbi.
It's very cloudy out right
Out.
very windy is what it is.
now.
They're real bad over there too, where
Yeah.
you're at, Rosemary?
It's like blowing like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's windy.
I'm surprised you have power up there, Mark.
Yeah, we do. You don't have power?
No, we do have power.
We've lost power at the airport, but we have power at the house.
Oh, geez.
But I mean, you're right behind some hills that would get fired. So I'm surprised you have power.
Yeah, well.
Oh, but your power's underground though, right?
Yeah, but we also the wind actually gets knocked down here a little bit. There's you can hear it, but it's the way we're right against the hillside, so we get some of it knocked down. But yeah, it is windy. You can hear it. I mean, you can hear it the way it's blowing.
Well, I heard it. Like I said, I've been up since 2:30 hearing it, the whistling between the two houses.
It was pretty bad at night. So it felt a little like winter today. Yesterday was gorgeous though.
Wasn't it?
Yesterday we went out for a bike ride and it was it was a day where you could almost forget that the world is falling apart. They no, it's not gonna fall apart. It's just very confusing.
It already fell apart.
It's very confusing. Oh man. It's a confusing time.
No, come on. Thursday, old people can start getting shots.
Yeah. I gotta talk Mary, I need to talk to you after class, okay? There's a friend of mine that just opened a hospice out here in Santa Clarita. She did home health care for years, also has hospice. So unfortunately, she opened up hospice at a bad time. I mean, not a whatever. It's a bad time for our world. It's not a bad time for hospice, unfortunately. But
actually, Mary has a dentist appointment this morning.
Oh, you do? All right. Well, good luck.
She's just gonna get on her skateboard and and sail over there.
What's happening with and you had of course a loss this week or a funeral this week. I guess the loss was last week, but you had the funeral.
So I guess they didn't have that. I thought they said they thought they were going to have a big problem getting into LA, getting my aunt here, but I guess they didn't.
Oh, good. Well, I spoke to the cemetery yesterday and they had 18 funerals on Sunday when I was there last. 18.
Wow.
In one day. And
now, you said you had one on Sunday too. Was it there?
I had one there too. And I had two. I had two virtually, the two together for the Kales. But they had 18 there that day, and they have told people they're booked up through this week.
Wow.
Sunday. They don't have, and it's really upsetting the Orthodox folks because they say, they said, well, you can't tell us we can't have the funeral for a week. So they don't know what to do, but they said we can only dig so many graves. And what happened was that people have plots there. It's not like they can go somewhere else. But the Orthodox rabbis are very upset about it, and the reality is that the Christian cemeteries are booked up for the next 3 weeks. Through February 8th. So I told them they could, something, tell them that you guys are doing your best, but it's not going to make people feel better. So, look, on one hand, they're already being told you can only have 10 people at a funeral, and now they're being told you're going to have to wait a week to have the funeral. I don't know. It's not even like it's not even an issue of, hey, well, we'll bury you and there'll be two, no one will be there, but the cemetery will at least do it. They can't they don't have enough staff to actually even do the work. So
I felt really bad
that was
for
a
my
week.
cousin. I felt really bad for my cousin on Sunday because he set up a Zoom meeting with his iPhone and he had us on mute, so we couldn't hear anything.
Oh no.
And he obviously walks away from it because he's under the tent. So I really felt bad. I was going to text you to go over there and tell him to unmute him,
I could have done it.
but
So yeah, Tracy's just telling me right.
I got Margot to point.
Just telling Santa Clarita folks over 65.
yeah,
Magic Mountain
Thursday.
has a lot of availability. Magic Mountain is Tracy just.
But you can't make reservations until Thursday, I think.
No,
you
she-
can choose the Thursday date.
You can
to make
choose
the
it.
reservation.
Yeah,
Can you?
On
Yeah.
Wednesday,
she just did it.
Wednesday, David and I are getting our COVID vaccine at Kaiser.
Very
Okay,
good.
now where did you go to make an appointment?
Trace, where did
I
you go?
didn't make an appointment. They called me.
Yeah,
Oh,
Tracy's gonna give me she's gonna email it to me right now. I'm gonna put it
oh,
up
great.
so you can do it. Yeah,
Good.
Kaiser,
Previously, I had made an appointment at Ralph's.
yeah. Well, Ralph's allowed people to do it and then they stopped. And as of right now, you still can't do it through Ralph's, right?
Correct. Ralph's is not showing.
Ralph's is not, are you sure?
Right.
I just tried.
Yeah, Ralph's isn't still.
Kaiser called us and we have appointments tomorrow afternoon.
Now, somebody told me that Kaiser's also vaccinating, non-Kaiser people. That's what I was told, but
They are.
Yeah, that's what Mary said. Mary, same thing.
I don't want to spread
I'll
that
ask
rumor,
tomorrow.
but
No, it says it on their site.
it says it on their site, Tracy says.
Maybe
So.
we're doing
It's downstairs, I think. It might maybe in the car. Yeah, but please do that. And I did mine through Ralph's, and in the end, last week on Friday, and I thought it was going to be more difficult. It took 5 minutes there. I mean, it feels strange getting vaccinated at Ralph's, but there's no way. Well, I just had to wait for the pharmacist to be free, and there was no line or anything. They just had actually the pharmacist told me she wished she could do more of them because they only can do 10 per day there, and she said she wished she could do more because they could. They have the ability. So I don't know if Ralph's is trying to figure out how to open that, but that was up at North Park, up on Decorah. So yeah, hopefully we'll start to see people
That's ours.
get vaccinated this week. Let's hope. But you know
Not
what happened was
Ventura
they,
County.
the event, if you're in Ventura or Orange County, it's a little easier. But anyways, what happened last week was that they rolled it out and then they unrolled it. And so it was a real mess. It was a real mess. So people actually booked it through Ralph's, through the pharmacy, and then they got told we're not doing it yet. So
Now, since you got it at Ralph's, will you get the second one from Ralph's then?
yeah, though I will tell you that as of yesterday, or maybe it is today, I'm not going to look now, but you couldn't log on. They were having a problem. They hadn't put up the second, they told me that it's going to say COVID-2 to select COVID-2 as a selection, and then you'll be able to do it. But as of when I did it, you couldn't book coming back, and they were working on it.
Oh, so you actually have to book for the second one.
Yeah. And by the way,
We were told that after our vaccines tomorrow, they would set up the second one
Right there.
right there.
that's awesome because yeah, it's I don't know
Reverend
how-
Lynn,
people who are lazy, I don't know how they're gonna do this, but anyways. There are a lot of people that are not necessarily, as we know, really great at taking care of their health. So I don't know what to say. So anyways, Rosemary, are you going to be able to read for us today?
Yes, I can read.
Awesome, because Judith is actually taking her daughter to the airport today, so she's not able to do that. I I actually just want to tell you right now, I'm looking at the Ralph site right now, and you can let me see. Well, I don't see it right now, but there wasn't right now. It's not showing the COVID selection but their website was pretty easy to use. Let me just see if it's, yeah.
Reverend Lynn, after tomorrow, once you get your vaccine, can I borrow your ID?
Absolutely. You need my Kaiser card.
Yeah. No, I need your ID. I'm under 65, so I need your ID.
Exactly.
I
We
will.
look alike. Come on.
Of course we do. I did shave my beard this morning, but
So we I don't know. I can't see how to do it right now, but I'm hoping the Ralph site didn't screw up again, because I just looked this now and you can't. It says you can do these other
how
vaccines.
far
but
apart are the shots?
well, I at Ralph's, they're given the Moderna, so
So
that's
it's 4 weeks.
4 weeks. So
4 weeks.
yeah, I have to go back.
Pfizer's 3.
Pfizer's 3, and they say you have a 4-day window. You can come with it 4 days earlier. That's what they told me. I could come 4 days earlier to do it. But yeah. So anyways, listen. Let's hope that this rollout again. I know it's because there's a lot of people in the county and all that stuff, but holy moly! I mean, come on, we gotta do a good job of it. I'm just hoping that once it happens, then it's just going to be rolled out like crazy.
Yeah, they just need the supply.
Maybe I'm naive, but I'm just hoping that once it happens, we just roll everybody out. So wait, I'm going to put up the link. That's what I'm doing.
Why don't you email it to
Well,
us, to us? So.
I could send it out to everybody. I'm a little worried at doing a mass email about what to do. Not only is there like a worry that we're going to give false information. I mean, not false information, the information that we gave at the time. Like if last week I told everybody you can go register for if you're over 65, I would have been true at that moment. And then, 3 hours later, they rescinded it. So I don't want to be responsible for doing that, but I feel comfortable with, because as of this moment, you can go on that site and register. So at least right now that works. So please.
I have to figure out how to cancel my appointment, because I made an appointment for sometime in February through Ralph's, and I couldn't see how to cancel, but I'll figure
You're
it out.
absolutely right. I don't know how to do that. And you want, like you feel like you have to, like I did that. I had a registration at Dodger Stadium, and I had another one in San Fernando as a backup. And
Right.
I did it through this other registration thing called, what's it called? I can't remember what it's called. And it's called Carbon. It was and so once I got the thing out at North Park at the Ralph's, I was able to cancel both of them really quickly. But I don't see how to do it at Ralph's. I don't see how to cancel it. I know there must be a way, but
I hope so. Right. Because
I
I made an appointment for me and for David.
And by the way, what you did, Reverend Lynn, was exactly, I did it, and I would recommend people doing it, because given the chaos and the disorder, you almost have to. But yeah, I mean, you definitely feel like a moral obligation to cancel it, because you feel like you're going to mess somebody out of a.
So you can probably right there register for the.
My guess is that there's probably ways to not. I mean, they're probably going to
We should.
fill those up with people. But I'm not encouraging people to not try to cancel it. But
Right.
if they're not making it easy,
I'll try.
we really don't have a choice right now. So, gosh, I mean, all I can tell you is I had very little soreness, a day later, but hardly any. And I've had vaccines that hurt a whole lot worse than this one. So, yep. Hold on one second. So we made an appointment for Margot Webb. Hold on one second. Can you see it? Sorry, 1 second, folks. So we want to make sure. I mean, she's 90. She's a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor who should. This should not be hard. There should be a doctor helping her. But anyways, sometimes we've got to do crazy stuff. And Sandy Keaton just texted me that her power is off. So Sandy's power has been shut off by Edison. So yes, we live in some weird times right now. That's all I can say. It's the wind howls outside is an appropriate metaphor. And it's a perfect time to talk about plagues, because we definitely feel like we're living in the midst of a whole bunch of them. And I mentioned last week, one of the weird things is that we're studying this in the Torah. It's our weekly Torah portion. Last week and this week are the plagues. And so it's really good because, well, it's a little challenging for me because I forget whether we discuss something in Torah study or in Midrash. It's generally, kind of the same. Well, we're basing it off the same material, either the Torah or the Midrash, but it is good to be reading both. I tried not to just look at the Midrash last Wednesday night at Torah study and tried to look at the text a little bit more in depth. And some of you were there for Wednesday night. I mean, there's so much more in the Midrash on the plagues that, when you read the two back to back, you realize how much more there is in the Midrash than there is in the Torah. And that's definitely the case today, because we're reading just a lot more pages. I mean, it's a lot more text. One thing, can you get in the Exodus, the book that I have by the way? But I just wanted to share one thing. I really enjoy Reverend Lynn's book that she shared with me about feminist Midrash, which I have by my desk. But one of the books that I have by my bed is a book on Exodus that was written by my professor. Yeah, so the feminist Midrash, right over here. This book I want to show you is my professor, Richard Friedman from UCSD and now from University of Georgia, wrote a few years ago on Exodus. It's got a kind of lays out his theory about the Exodus, whether it happened or didn't happen. And his feeling is that the Exodus did happen, that if there's parts of it that didn't happen, that happened differently, there's a kernel of a real event. And he believes that when people talk about the plagues are a possibility, that, again, he doesn't like the idea that people are trying to explain natural occurrences, a volcano that's set into motion, he doesn't like those theories because they don't address what really happens in the plagues. And when you read them, you really see that, well, did they take these stories? Were there occurrences and then they embellish them? He's more concerned with whether the Exodus actually really happened. And it's his belief that it did happen, that it may have happened just to the Levites, to the tribe of Moses and Aaron, and that only that tribe came from Egypt and settled into the land, and that they may have originally been Israelite people who had been enslaved and then who came out and settled back amongst their people. But he's more concerned with the fact that, again, when you look at the text, there really does seem to be this real issue that even though there's complete competing stories and parts of it that maybe again didn't exactly happen the way they did. This element really did happen, and his feeling, and he's a documentary hypothesis. He's a priest of that. He's a big advocate for the documentary hypothesis. He says that even though there's different stories, that there's different versions of it, that doesn't prove that it didn't happen. That's actually better proof that it did happen, and that different people told different versions of the same story. So he just intuitively, and he does talk about it, in intuitive history, he does believe that you have to make some leaps, but you make them based on what you think and what you feel, and not to necessarily prove the text. He doesn't attempt to prove the text of the Torah, but he says that, look, if you look at the Torah itself, there is evidence there that that parts of the Exodus story probably happened. The argument is, well, we never found evidence for the Exodus, but we haven't found evidence that disproves that an Exodus happened. And that's another important thing. And again, that doesn't mean the burden of saying that it did happen is, I'm not saying whose burden that is. But when people came out a few years ago, including people like David Wolpe and other rabbis and professors of Bible who said it didn't happen, Friedman's point is you can't say that. Archaeology hasn't proven, and he just said the absence of proof doesn't prove that there's an absence of the event happening. And so, he's careful to kind of warn people, don't assume that the evidence is that there's that it didn't happen. I'm going to I thought Tracy was going to get this book. I'm going to show
Rabbi,
you. Yeah.
you said that Rabbi Wolpe said he doesn't believe it. So
Yeah.
does that have any inference for him celebrating Passover?
Well, here's the book. It's called The Exodus. The Exodus. How it happened and why it mattered. Oh, here it is. Well, I shared it so you can see it much clearer on where I shared it. Look, Wolpe's point was essentially, he kind of, with great fanfare, and this was about 15 years. I mean, this didn't just happen that Wolpe came out and did it, but as a conservative rabbi to come out and say that, it was a big splash. And he said his point was that if it didn't happen, it doesn't take away from the importance of it. And so he said, essentially, even if it's a fairy tale, it's so important that, we have Passover, we should celebrate Passover, but it did upset a lot of people. I mean, he knew what it would trigger by coming out and saying it. As one of the premier conservative rabbis in the country, he knew what was going to happen by saying it. So Friedman is just a really good writer too. I mean, he's just funny, and he brings in a lot of he relates things to music and to film, and he'll talk about The Godfather and the same, but it's he's really trying to find the truth, but also again trying to help us understand. Again, the book is called How It Happened and Why It Matters. And his feeling really is that the Exodus is the most important event in Jewish history, and really to some extent in world history, because it sets everything into motion. This idea that that we have a responsibility to take care of the poor and the disenfranchised, all of that comes out of the Exodus. I mean, every time the Bible says you have to take care of the poor and the down, because you were strangers in a strange land, or because you were slaves, or because I redeemed you from Egypt, the foundational importance for everything else that happens, because again, the people coming out of Egypt allows them to have the covenant. It allows them to have the law. It allows them to work towards the liberation of everybody. So it's you know, it's so, you know, I would say it's a very topical book for us now because we're studying it in Midrash, but we're also, of course, reading it for the next few weeks on as part of the weekly Torah portion. And the book is only about 200 pages. 200 and like with the appendices, which are kind of cool too, because they kind of show you who wrote the Bible, you know, the different authors. It's 220 pages, so it's a light read. It's like taking a course with him for a couple sessions. So and it'll answer those questions too that a lot of people have about, well, what about the volcano? What about Akhenaten? What about the theories about Moses and who Moses really was? All those things will be addressed in it. So I will tell you that it's a good one for you to take a look at. So let me just take a moment to get us online, and we're gonna start reading about the plagues. This is for me, when I and we have a chance to study this in such detail. To some extent, I forgot how much I've read and studied how much I've read and studied about the plagues. I kind of amazed at still that when I read it, and we have been reading, as we've been reading the last few weeks with you, how much I've either forgotten or how much I realize there is on the plagues in the Midrash. And again, some of this is stuff that we read at Passover because it was rabbinic era and it made its way into the Haggadah. So some of it we kind of are familiar with, not just from the Torah, but from the Haggadah. But it also is, just the full weight of what we read is kind of amazing. So let me put up the text. Oh, and today I wanted to mention too, today is the secular yard site of our friend Carol Art, with the many names that he was known, and he passed away last year at this time. And so he was part of a lot of our classes. And so I think we can also kind of dedicate our study today to Cal. And we were thinking about him too, because he always used to help out with the Purim spiels that we would write for Purim, the musical parodies. He always worked on those, and we're working on those. I was on the phone with Wendy yesterday, and we're working on Purim. So let's take a look at the plagues. And so where we left off was we read first of all in the Midrash that these plagues lasted for a year, which I found ironic because we're coming on a year of our modern plague year. And of course, we talked about the fact that and we read through the plagues in a couple of midrashic styles. The fact that some of them were wrought by Moses, some by Aaron, some by both of them, some by God. They come from different elements. They come from the earth, the air, the fire, the water, not in that order. And we also read that they affected the gods of Egypt. And we finished with this very interesting midrash last week, that Pharaoh, we read in the Torah that Moses confronts Pharaoh at the river in the morning. And so the rabbis explain, why is this that Pharaoh's in the river in the morning? That's because that's where he goes to the bathroom. He goes there so that the people don't know that he goes to the bathroom like every other person. But he's a god, and a god doesn't go to the bathroom. So what does he do? He goes in the water and no one can see him. So just think about it. This is a wonderful midrash explaining a very strange situation, if you think about it, which is that Moses confronts Pharaoh, and it happens more than once, in the morning while Pharaoh is bathing, which at the very least is, well, we say mano a mano, but it's also, there's something weird about confronting somebody when they're bathing or when they're out in the water, in kind of a private space. And so the rabbis pick up on that and say what you might have been thinking, or maybe even what you weren't thinking, that this private space was about as private as you could get. Though, when the rabbis wrote this, going to the bathroom was not necessarily always a private act, of course, because a privy was not really private. People used to share their going to the bathroom, especially during the Roman era, with their friends and their neighbors. They would go to a communal latrine. And so it was not uncommon to see people going to the bathroom in those days. But again, to see Pharaoh go to the bathroom, that would have been weird. And they made it weird. So, so this is another set of midrashim on what the plagues were, how the plagues were initiated, how they were enabled, how they were engaged, how God put these into put them into play. Because the Torah gives us some information, but people want to know more, and they want to know, how does God do this? And so we get it. And of course, they're going to teach some lessons here that are profound, that are eloquent, that are funny. So let's take a look. Rosemary, would you start reading for us?
Okay. Then Moses made known to him that God would turn the water into blood if he refused to let Israel go. In the warning, we can discern the difference between God and man. When a mortal harbors the intention to do an injury to an enemy, he lies in wait for the moment when he can strike an unexpected blow. But God is outspoken. He warned Pharaoh and the Egyptians in public whenever a plague was about to descend, and each warning was repeated by Moses for a period of 3 weeks, although the plague itself endured but a single week.
Yeah, so here we get kind of the way the Bible doesn't really tell us how long each plague lasted. There are exceptions, right? So we hear the darkness was there for 3 days. I mean, we do get occasionally, descriptions, but mostly they don't talk about how long the plague lasts. Well, the Midrash here does. But what's interesting about it is that the buildup for the plague lasts longer than the plague itself. And so God is letting people know that this is going to happen, and they feel the buildup for a few weeks. Now, the first time, or the first few times this would have happened, the people of Egypt probably didn't think that much about it. It's a lot of noise, and then the thing happens, and okay. But every single time that this is happening, and by the 5th, 6th, 7th plague, and you can see it in the Torah, the Egyptians are like, let's just stop this already. So what the Midrash just said is that, yeah, that was the intention. People, when they try to hurt somebody, they don't tell you that they're going to hurt you. Generally, they don't tell you, I'm going to get you back. Well, you can do it, because of course that makes people crazy when you tell them, I'm going to get you back, and you don't know what, that was like the thing you would do to your brother or sister. It's, I'm going to hit you, but I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to hit you. I'm going to hit you. You're just not going to know when I'm going to hit you. You could do that. You can play that game for a while. Most people will forget. It's not God. God is actually making, to some extent, the anticipation last far longer than the plague. And so if each plague lasts essentially a month, 3 weeks of preparation, of repeating over and over again that's happening the week of the plague itself, then you got a month for every plague. It doesn't say that in the Torah. I don't want anybody to say, well, where did they get that? They got it from this idea that the plagues are announced. The Torah tells us that they are announced, but then it doesn't say how long they were announced. And the rabbis learn from, teach us that. I say learn from that because that's what, when we say that in Jewish learning, it says the rabbis learn from this, that they really are telling us that God is like that older brother that will tell you, I'm going to get you. You're just not going to know. You just, it's going to happen. And anticipation ends up being part of the plague itself. That's what they just told us happened. So, but of course we know what's going to happen.
As Pharaoh would not lay the warning to heart, the plague announced by Moses was let loose upon him and his people. The waters were turned into blood. It is a well-known proverb, beat the idols and the priests are in terror. God smote the river Nile, which the Egyptians worshipped as their god, in order to terrify Pharaoh and his people and force them to do the divine will.
Wow. So that's something you probably already always assumed, which was part of the plague's power was in hurting the Egyptian gods. And so the Nile, which was their god, one of their gods, is it's very serious because the Nile dies, or it looks like it's dying. So this is a terrible plague for the Egyptians. The Egyptians are, and their whole system of religion, theology, is being turned upside down. So it's nothing that you probably haven't thought of before, but they're saying, yeah, well, there's even a proverb about it. This next part is not a part maybe you ever thought of, but let's take a look at it.
To produce the plague, Aaron took his rod and stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt. Moses had no part in performing the miracle, for God had said to him, "The water that watched over your safety when you were exposed in the Nile shall not suffer harm through you."
Yep. So the first plague, the plague of the Nile, it says specifically in Exodus chapter 7, God said to Moses, "Say to Aaron, take your rod and hold it out over hold your arm over the waters of Egypt." And Aaron does that. It says that actually Moses and Aaron did it just as he commanded. But again, the idea is that Aaron is the one who actually stretches out. So, it's not necessarily part of your memory maybe of what happens there, but yes, this is a plague that's done through Aaron, or at least through Aaron's arm. Now, we know that Aaron does some of the plagues, but the rabbis picked up an interesting theme here, which is that God said to Moses, "You can't hurt the Nile because the Nile watched over you." It's a weird little thing that you might not have thought of, but the rabbis actually said that's one of the reasons why Moses doesn't hurt the Nile, because the Nile protected him, which in a way is almost, again, deifying the Nile, that it had that power, it had that accolade or honor of taking care of Moses. But that's what they threw out there, that again, this irony that but of course we're going to have the irony that the Nile was where these babies were also murdered. So anyways, so we're going to drill down into these plagues a little bit more right now. So here, that is one other thing. Moses doesn't hurt the Nile. Aaron does, if you will. All right.
Aaron had scarcely executed the divine bidding when all the water of Egypt became blood, even such as was kept in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. The very spittle of an Egyptian turned into blood. No sooner had he ejected it from his mouth. And blood dripped also from the idols of the Egyptians.
Yeah, that last part of the last sentence, that's not in the Torah. The other part is there, that the water that they took out of the Nile and put into other things, vessels, cups, that's in the Torah. But now that their spit turned into blood, also says that blood is dripping out of the idols of the Egyptians. That's freaky. That's scary. Made it even worse, right? So the Midrash scares us even more. But wait, there's more. That's not in the Torah, but the rabbis derive from this weird, already, scary situation. And the fact that the Torah says it's not just in the water itself. It's when people took the water out and was in somewhere else, that also was blood. Here we go.
The transformation of the waters into blood was intended mainly as a punishment for the oppressors, but it was at the same time a source of profit for the oppressed. It gave the Israelites the opportunity of amassing great wealth. The Egyptians paid them large sums for their water, for if an Egyptian and an Israelite drew water from the same trough, the portion carried off by the Egyptian was bound to be useless. It turned into blood. To be sure, nothing helped the Egyptians in their distress, for though they drank water from the same cup as an Israelite, it became blood in their mouth.
Okay, so that makes the plague even crazier, because it wasn't turning to blood for the Israelites. And so the Israelites made money drawing water out for the Egyptians. Though the Midrash, probably a later version of it, says again, that didn't work. They'd pay them to draw out the water, good water. It doesn't matter because once they held it, it turned to blood. So the plague was crazy, crazy. Problem is the Torah doesn't say that at all. As a matter of fact, the Torah doesn't even make it clear that it doesn't affect the Israelites. It is very possible that the plague of blood affected the Israelites. And we don't like that idea because it means that the Israelites had to suffer the same punishment that the Egyptians did. But there is a possibility that the plague had to affect the Israelites so that they would believe too. But the rabbis here went in a completely different direction, which is that no, would not affect the Israelites. The Israelites ended up getting wealthy from this, which again is weird because it says that the Egyptians at the end, the Torah does say the Egyptians gave Israel all their wealth when they left anyways. But so it's a weird midrash, but it kind of it addresses the issue that the Torah really doesn't say, which is did this plague affect the Israelites? It doesn't say that it didn't. It doesn't say that it did, but it also doesn't say that it didn't. So you could go very different ways on whether this plague also was meant to teach the Israelites a lesson themselves. The Torah does tell us, though, a very strange thing, which is that the Egyptians are able to replicate this plague, just like they were with the staff turning into snakes. They replicate this plague, which is, in a sense, I'm going to tell you, a little funny, too, when you think about it. But here's the weird part about the way the Torah says that this happens.
However, this plague did not impress Pharaoh as a punishment inflicted in the name of God, because with the help of the angels of destruction, the magicians of Egypt produced the same phenomenon of changing water into blood. Therefore, he hearkened not unto the words of Moses.
Yeah, so here it tells us that what the Torah tells us, which is that the Egyptian magicians do the same thing. It says so. It says that so for the first few plagues, not the first plague, the first few plagues. So the Torah says that. What the Torah doesn't tell us is how do they do it? You know, the assumption is always, well, at least I shouldn't say the assumption. My assumption as a kid was that they produced like similar results using their magic and their science, if you will. You know, I don't remember who told it to me, but a long time ago, you know, when I was studying the plagues, and every kid, this is one of those things that you're captivated by, not just because you read it every year at Passover and the plagues. It's wow. You think about the plagues. I mean, that's miraculous stuff. Like, and then not one thing, but 10 things. It's like, boom, another one. So, as a kid, somebody told me, oh yeah, the Egyptians, the magicians, were the scientists at the time. They had the access to all this knowledge. Clearly, Egypt was far advanced from everybody else. And so, the Egyptians knew how to turn the blood, turn the water blood, make this miracle, replicate it. They took some red clay or something and put it in the water, and it made it look like blood. That they knew how to draw out that color. They used food dye or whatever. They understood that kind of stuff. Somebody told me that, whatever, some teacher or whatever told me that that's the way it happened. That it wasn't real. It wasn't a real miracle. Well, that's not what the rabbis just said. In the Midrash that Rosemary just uttered, and I'm not poking, on Rosemary right now saying that, though she's a big Harry Potter aficionado. This is real according to the rabbis, in the sense that it's real magic, real powerful stuff, like the stuff that you don't, it's not like, looks like magic. It's not the magic that you see at Magic Castle, maybe. It's bona fide, real, crazy, supernatural magic. That's what they just said. Because when it says the angels of destruction did it, it was the same type of access to supernatural power. It's not God. It doesn't say God did it, but the angels of destruction are created by God. They're agents of God. And the Egyptians had access to that power. That's what the Midrash just said. It doesn't say it's fake magic, if you will. This is absolute, real, supernatural stuff that they did. So that's really weird, because you didn't have to go there. You could have said, hey, well, they just made it look, the Torah says that they did it.
Yeah, it could have been stage magic, but they make it real magic.
Real, supernatural. Like I said, this is not stage magic. That's another word, fake magic. So that's what they just said. So it's in a sense, it's even more frightening, because it throws out there the fact that the Egyptians had access to supernatural power, which, I mean, holy moly, if you look at the pyramids, we still do that today. I mean, we're still thinking this didn't happen with any science access to whatever, whether it was aliens or supernatural or whatever else. There are a lot of us who still look at that and go, that couldn't have happened normally. So the fact that our ancestors 2,000 years ago looked back at that stuff and said, no, that's real, in the sense that really is pretty frightening and crazy. They went there. They basically just said, hey, that's possible. So I do want to tell you, the Midrash at least doesn't say that they staged it. So what I thought of as a kid, it's not necessarily always what we've been taught. I'm not saying that you can't teach that to a kid. You can teach, Torah doesn't say. That's a different way to go, though, than the traditional Midrash here. And you'll see. So that's a little scary. Some of it's scary. Some of it's funny. I think it's got to be a little funny. So let's read the frogs.
The next was the plague of the frogs, and again it was Aaron that performed the wonder. He stretched forth his hand with his rod over the rivers and caused frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt. Moses, whose life had been preserved by the water, was kept from poisoning his savior with the reptiles. At first, only a single frog appeared, but he began to croak, summoning so many companions that the whole land of Egypt swarmed with them. Wherever an Egyptian took up his stand, frogs appeared. And in some mysterious way, they were able to pierce the hardest of metals, and even the marble palaces of the Egyptian nobles afforded no protection against them. If a frog came close to them, the walls split asunder immediately. Make way, the frogs would call out to the stone, that I may do the will of my creator. And at once the marble showed a rift through which the frogs entered, and then they attacked the Egyptians bodily and mutilated and overwhelmed them. In their ardor to fulfill the behest of God, the frogs cast themselves into the red hot flames of the bake ovens and devoured the bread. Centuries later, the three holy children, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were ordered by Nebuchadnezzar to pay worship to his idols on penalty of death in the burning furnace. And they said, if the frogs, which were under no obligation to glorify the name of God, nevertheless threw themselves into the fire in order to execute the divine will concerning the punishment of the Egyptians, how much more should we be ready to expose our lives to the fire for the greater glory of his name? And the zealous frogs were not permitted to go unrewarded. While the others were destroyed from Pharaoh and the Egyptian houses at the moment appointed as the last of the plague, God saved those in the bake ovens alive. The fire had no power to do them the least harm.
Yeah. So let's talk about what just happens with this. We're not done with the frogs. Actually, yeah. Well, let's talk about what just happened there, because normally, I mean, the frogs were bad. I mean, the frogs, again, through Aaron, and again a similar answer, which is that Moses was saved by the Nile, so Moses isn't going to harm the Nile. But why does the Midrash go into this detail? And why does it give us these things that are, well, let's talk about a couple. Let's talk about a couple of them for, let's kind of talk about why the Midrash does what it does. Why is it focused on these things? So actually, I'm going to do something real quick so that you can see it. In this case, I don't go to we don't go back to the Torah. We haven't been going back to the Torah that much, but I do want to show you why the Midrash does what it does right here. So here's the plague of frogs right here. So they tell them frogs are going to get you. Again, there's an announcing of it. And here's the Hebrew. So I just show you one thing in Hebrew. And again, even if you don't read Hebrew, it's okay. So it says, and I mentioned this Wednesday because this is a weird thing here. It says the Tzfardaim, the frogs. Tzfardaim is plural of Tzfardea, which is frogs. So frog is Tzfardea, Tzfardaim is frogs. So it says, bring up the frogs in the land of Egypt. And it says, Aaron held out his arm over the waters, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. So the word right says, it says that he stretched his arm out over Egypt, over the waters of Egypt, and Hatzfardea, the frog, came up and covered the land of Egypt. Now, the rabbis point out a long time ago that frog, like locust or other things, don't necessarily have to be said plural. So they did point out this is not a linguistic anomaly or some weird thing. It doesn't have to be read frog. There was a frog. But there were some rabbis who said, no, there was one frog. It came out first. And this was a crazy plague because the frog comes out, one huge big frog. It's got to be a big frog because it says it covered the land of Egypt. So the weird visual is, if you will, on this is that the frog comes out and out of his mouth springs forth all these other frogs. So that They read it literally, and or some people read it literally and said the next word it says frogs came up. But in this case, again, it's the frogs that the Egyptian magicians call up. So this is meant to be, I believe this is meant to be humorous in the Torah, which is that they're dealing with a plague of frogs. Well, first of all, when God does it, it comes out. This is part of the reason why we have the giant frog. Okay, it's one thing for the magicians to bring up a bunch of frogs out of the water. You know, again, stage magic or whatever, they could have thrown a bunch of frog, I mean, it would take a while, right? But you could put little tadpoles in there, and then the frogs come out. And there are no frogs there. Now they are. It would take a few days, but they bring out frogs. When they do it, it's because there's a bunch of frogs that come out of the water. Aaron and Moses and God do it by bringing out one big giant frog, and then that frog that's a freaky plague. It makes the plague even scarier. It's like one giant frog comes out and it explodes, and then all these other little frogs come out of it. So, I mean, that's part of the reason, is that it differentiates between what the Egyptians are able to do. Moses's and Aaron's plague, that's a plague. I mean, that's a spectacle. It's very scary. It's like the vampire, it's like the Dracula that splits in all those bats. It's freaky. And so the rabbis point out that, well, let's go there. Let's go with the frog becomes frogs. But again, Pharaoh says, get rid of these frogs and I'll let you go, at least to worship, not to necessarily come back. But here it also says, wait a second, I went over it. Hold it. So they died in their houses. No, where did I go? Oh, I think it's in the here. It's not in the it happened, it's in the this is going to happen part. The Nile shall swarm with frogs. Again, it's the plural. And they shall come up and enter your palace, your bedchamber, your bed, the houses of your quarters and your people, and your ovens and your kneading bowls. So the oven part, freaked people out. That's
Said the ovens would be hot.
true. And it's obviously the fact that that's not usually where frogs go. Because
Right.
frogs don't go, usually they like the water, and it's wouldn't have been, so it was also destroying their food supply, that this plague of frogs was doing it. Look, it's just a weird detail the Torah says, and so that they draw from this. Well, where else do we see ovens? And we see ovens mentioned in the story of Daniel and his friends who get put into an oven. And so the rabbis derived from this that when they went into their oven, the three young men, that they were doing what the frogs did. And they said, look, the frogs could do it. If the frogs can do it, how much more? And they don't have to do it. They're not people. They're not beholden to God. They don't have to be martyrs. If they did it, then we can do it. So they derive some really strange lesson from the other place we read about ovens. It is very scary in a way that this was one of the things that people picked up on, but for a lot of reasons. But it also says, of course, that they went through their homes, into their houses. And the rabbis derive from that quite literally that frogs came through their houses. And so these frogs went through marble. That's how scary this plague was, is it actually destroyed their houses. So it's not just frogs jumping around. It's frogs coming through. And again, when it says your people, we read this last week, the Midrash says that the plague actually affected people, that the frogs came out of the people themselves, that these frogs emanate, like were literally coming out of their mouths, which is, again, this plague that we usually make fun of and have kids, we sing songs about the plague of the frogs because it sounds funny. Not funny. It's not funny. It's not funny in the Torah necessarily, but the rabbis.
It's not funny, but it is funny. It's not funny, but it is funny.
Yes, and the rabbis know that. The rabbis know that a plague of frogs is in itself a strange thing because no one's afraid of a frog. You're inconvenienced by a frog. You may not like to hear a frog. As I mentioned last week, my wife loves frogs. Tracy's spirit animal, when, I guess she doesn't collect them anymore, but she had a whole collection of frogs when she was younger. I guess she was searching for a frog when she met me. She was assuming I would turn into a prince. It never happened. But frogs are cute, I guess, for some people. They're not the plague. To some extent, the rabbis are working with this plague, right? They're working with the plague of frogs, and they're saying, well, this must have been scary, right? God wouldn't have us laughing at the frogs. But look, at the end of the day, they're not a frightening animal. But
Unless they're in South America.
Yeah. Also could be used as a hallucinogen too. But they don't, I guess not the Egyptian ones, but the rabbis turn it into a fairly scary plague, or they try. And in some ways they make it even more crazy because again, they're making it, they're using the text to kind of have us imagine how bad this could really be. And so the frogs are coming everywhere. But that's not all, because the plague does say that the frogs died, or the Torah says that what's left over is pretty bad too. Here we go.
Now, although the Egyptian magicians also brought up frogs upon the land of Egypt through the help of demons, Pharaoh nevertheless declared himself ready to let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. The difference between this plague and the first was that water turned into blood had not caused him any personal inconvenience, while the swarms of frogs inflicted physical suffering. And he gave the promise to Moses to let Israel go in the hope of ridding himself of the pain he experienced. And Moses, in turn, promised to entreat God for him on the following day. It could not be done at once because the 7 days' term had not yet elapsed. The prayer offered by Moses on behalf of Pharaoh was granted. All the frogs perished, and their destruction was too swift for them to retire to the water. Consequently, the whole land was filled with a stench from the decaying frogs, for they had been so numerous that every man of the Egyptians gathered together 4 heaps of them. Although the frogs had filled all the marketplaces and stables and dwellings, they retreated before the Hebrews as if they had been able to distinguish between the 2 nations and had known which of them it was proper to abuse and which to treat with consideration. Besides sparing the Hebrews in the land of Egypt, the frogs kept within the limits of the land, in no wise trenching upon the territory of the neighboring nations. Indeed, they were the means of settling peaceably an old boundary dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia. Wherever they appeared, so far extended the Egyptian domain. All beyond their line belonged to Ethiopia.
So they actually helped settle a border dispute because it says they covered the land of Egypt. They didn't go further. So again, one of the parts that the rabbis point out is, like, what's miraculous about frogs? Well, if you read it carefully, it says it only covered the land of Egypt. And they meant it literally. The rabbis took that literally. Not the frogs couldn't step out of this this unseen boundary. You and I can't always tell where, where's the border between, there's not necessarily a line unless you go to 4 corners. You don't know where or you go to the border, go to the wall. There's no in the old days, there was probably be a pillar or some type of marker with a boundary, but it doesn't go all along the whole boundary, all the whole border. So what they had here was the frogs taught the Egyptians a lesson also with where their border was with the Ethiopians, the country that's south of their country. Actually, of course, today, Ethiopia and Egypt do not border each other. There is a country between the two of them called Sudan. So they don't border each other. But Sudan in those days was partly Egyptian and partly Ethiopian. There was no Sudan. There was an area there that Put, the land of Put, which was sometimes Egyptian and sometimes Ethiopian, which is why there's a border dispute. And so the frogs helped settle that border dispute. So again, they derived something from, it was only in Egypt, and the frogs couldn't leave Egypt. That was part of what made the miracle so miraculous. And of course, these frogs were just everywhere, and they affected people in the fact that it was very hard to clean up, which the Torah says that their stench of them was really, really bad. You can imagine. So what's interesting about this plague is that there's a cleanup that has to happen with the plague. It's not just the plague happens and then assumedly, when the blood stopped in the Nile, well, there was probably a cleanup then too, right? There was the fish and everything that died. But here it's there's a massive cleanup effort that has to happen. The rabbis also go there that this did not affect the Hebrews. The Hebrews did not get affected by the plagues. It does not say that in the Torah. It does not say that the plague of frogs didn't affect the Israelites. It doesn't say that. It also does say in the Torah that Pharaoh says, okay, get rid of it. So Pharaoh, to some extent, cries uncle after the second plague. It really only takes him 2 plagues for him to say, yeah, stop, get out. Of course, we know that it's going to take another 8 plagues after these. But it's interesting that he starts to relent. He starts to crack after the second plague, even a plague that his own magicians can do. So, we talked about it at Tuesday night, whether Pharaoh really does have free will, because the Torah makes it pretty clear that God hardens his heart, stiffens his heart, makes his heart stubborn. There's 3 different words that are used for that: hardening of the heart, stiffening, hardened, and made stubborn or made heavy, if you will. Look, what we see here is that Pharaoh knows why it's happening from the very beginning. He knows that there's a way for him to get out of it. He will not do it. Now, again, the Torah says that God made sure he couldn't do it. God made sure he couldn't. But there's this real question of, again, look at what he does. Even at this early stage, Pharaoh is changing his mind, and the way he changes his mind is a very human way. Now you could say, well, okay, but it says God hardened his heart. And we've talked about this really every year. We always talk about it, whether Pharaoh really has free will. But there is something that you don't need God to make it very hard for you to change your behavior. If that's God, then we're all being touched by God a lot, because every time there's something that we're doing that we know is wrong and we can't stop ourselves from doing it, this is what the Torah says happens. We know we're not supposed to do it. We do it anyways. We repeat it, and then we get mad that we went and did it anyways. So it's a very human thing to do. And the way he finally, gets broken down is very human. So again, it says that God was involved in it very clearly, but it is a very human um, experience that Pharaoh has, which is we don't relent easy. We don't go unless we're kicking and screaming. Um, so here,
Pharaoh, but Pharaoh was like the wicked that cry to God in their distress, and when their fortunes prosper, slide back into their old impious ways. No sooner had the frogs departed from him, his houses, his servants, and his people, than he hardened his heart again and refused to let Israel go. Thereupon God sent the plague of the lice, the last of those brought upon Egypt through the mediation of Aaron. Moses could have no part in it, for, said God, the earth that afforded you protection when she permitted you to hide the slain Egyptian shall not suffer through your hand.
yeah. And by the way, I want to point out, what did I mean by what I just said too? I didn't say this explicitly. After the second plague, it does not say, I just looked it up too, just to make sure I say this correctly. It doesn't say when Pharaoh changes his mind, it doesn't say that God hardened his heart. It doesn't say it. It says it, it already said it. Okay, so I will say that, well, we already know it's going to happen because God said it's going to happen. He said it to Moses right away. But I will show you what it says right here. When Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not heed them as the Lord had spoken. Now, I only want to point out that in the next plagues, it says Pharaoh's heart stiffened and he would not heed them. But what we get here later on is, again, Pharaoh became stubborn this time also and not let the people go. But here we get the line after boils. It says, "Vayachazek Adonai et lev Paro," but the Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, and he would not heed them. There, the verb quite clearly says, "The Lord stiffened." And so at that point, you could say that God isn't letting Pharaoh change his mind. That's where it gets a little bit more, I don't know if the word's problematic, but there the blame, if you will, for Moses, for Pharaoh not doing what he needed to do at that point was that God wouldn't let him change his mind. But again, you could make the argument, and the rabbis definitely do, that it's a setup because God told Moses from the very beginning at the burning bush, I'm going to harden his heart. I'm going to make this happen. He doesn't have free will to some extent. But there does seem to be a feeling, at least, and again, we could talk about whether it's a different author, if it's a different, like, if it's a different message. I don't know, however you want to say it. I will tell you, there is something, though, different in the language that as the plagues continue, that it does seem like Pharaoh doesn't have a choice anymore, and the Midrash picks it up. And again, the Midrash says Pharaoh was like the wicked, not necessarily just Egyptian wicked, but any wicked person. And I would make the argument every single person in the whole world that ever lived, when their fortunes prosper, they slide back to their old impious ways, which is that when we're not scared anymore, we go back and behave the way we want to behave. We go back to bad self-destructive behavior if no one's watching and if there's no consequences anymore. So the idea that it's the wicked, I would just point out, it's maybe not just the wicked. Maybe it's the in-between people and pretty much everybody who's ever lived, which is most of us can't keep it up. So that is something to consider. So let's read this third plague.
The Egyptian magicians, having boasted that they were able to produce the first two plagues, an empty boast it was, for they did not bring them about with their enchantments, but only because Moses willed them to do it. God put them to shame with the third plague. They tried in vain to imitate it. The demons could not aid them, for their power is limited to the production of things larger than a barley grain, and lice are smaller. The magicians had to admit, this is the finger of God. Their failure put an end once for all to their attempts to do as Moses did.
Well, yeah, you can finish the next paragraph.
But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and God spoke to Moses, saying, this wicked fellow remains hard of heart in spite of the three plagues. The fourth shall be much worse than those which have preceded it. Go to him, therefore, and warn him it would be well for him to let my people go, that the plague come not upon him.
Not a whole lot about the plague of lice, quite frankly. But again, there is a couple things there that are interesting.
Like, lice are probably like the most realistic one.
Yeah, but for just in honor of Rosemary learned a little bit about ancient magic just now. Demons don't have things. They don't have power over little things.
No
I
power
thought
over
Rosemary
fire.
had lice. I mean, that's where you're going at.
No, stop it. No, I was saying Rosemary knows this about magic. I don't know. Maybe she didn't know it. That demons don't have the power over little tiny things. Only God does. It's kind of weird, which is this idea that if something's too small,
No, I don't know where they got that idea from.
no, so it's kind of this idea that things that are at that level, if you will, only God can manipulate those. And of course, lice eggs are tiny, or like the smallest things that people knew were there. Like, look, they didn't have microscopes, but you could see a lice egg. I mean, you can. People still do it. There's people that you can hire when you have lice that can check this out, right? So yeah, so this is about the smallest you can get. And so this must have been it's said with such force and such, kind of, they don't even need to substantiate it. What it's telling us, of course, is that that at a certain level, God's power transcends things that we can even see. So it shouldn't really surprise us, right? But what it's saying is that people who have the dark arts, if you will, they can only manipulate things that you can see, which is kind of their way of saying not quite as well. It's not. It is definitely saying it's not like what God does. God works on the molecular level, whereas these magicians and these dark wizards, they can only use what you can see. They have control over what you can see. And so they can't manipulate the things that you can't see. So it's kind of a weird idea, because of course it means that there is a difference between, well, obviously between God and demons and angels, but there also is this kind of idea that there is, even if they didn't understand molecules and atoms and bacteria and virus and things like that, they knew that there's things that we can't see, that those things, that's God. And so it's kind of a weird way of kind of putting out there that God works on a level that again, even magicians and wizards can't touch. Which again is that there's a supernatural. They even if they recognize it's supernatural, there's supernatural and then there's God. And so it's almost like there's three things. There's what you and I can do. There's what the demons and angels can do. And then there's things that God can do. And God can do all of them. But, you know, as you get more human, you have less control. And so they kind of threw that out there, that there's something that that there's a level that only God works at. So at that level, that's when that is after the third plague, that's when the magicians say, I can't do it. So interestingly, the magicians give up after Pharaoh to some extent. Well, Pharaoh gave up after the second plague and said, just get out of here, get these people out, get the frogs out. Even though so what I'm saying is that even though the magicians could do the second plague, Pharaoh still wanted to give up. Now they're saying, hey, God, you know, God's real. This is real. This is really happening. All right. But now something changes. In the rest of the plagues, now it's Moses that is getting involved in the plagues. So let's take a look at what that actually means.
The fourth plague was also announced to the king early in the morning by the river's brink. Pharaoh went there regularly, for he was one of the magi who need water for their enchantments. Moses's daily morning visits were beginning to annoy him, and he left the house early in the hope of circumventing his monitor. But God, who knows the thoughts of man, sent Moses to Pharaoh at the very moment of his going forth.
Well, let's just explain that a little bit, which is so the rabbis pick up on a few things here. One is that these confrontations of Moses and Pharaoh at the river, these are weird. This is not the way people normally do political theater, which we've mentioned before. I think we mentioned on Wednesday night. This is definitely political theater. And political theater is very hot right now, by the way. I don't want to talk about politics, but I will tell you that political theater is very hot right now. And by political theater, I mean people getting up in front of other people and saying things and doing things for political reasons. And in some cases, acting a little bit, you know, maybe over dramatizing some of their emotion. Doesn't mean that there's not real stuff there. It just means that there is something called political theater. I didn't invent it. They didn't invent it. The Greeks didn't invent it. It was probably back to when people first got involved in society, setting up a society, any type of community. People would act things out. But this is a weird acting out, because Moses and Pharaoh's confrontations were happening in a very limited, small area. And as much as this was dramatic and political, how many people are seeing this? But it's also weird because, again, Pharaoh does not like the fact that Moses is there wherever he is going, including in his most intimate moments. So he's not liking these visits.
But Rabbi,
yeah.
I know we kind of discussed it before, but if God knows what Pharaoh's going to do and when, he knows he's not going to go by all these plagues. It's going to be the last plague that's going to do it. So why even have these plagues? And just go to the 10th.
Okay, so
is it because of Passover we need to dip 10 times?
It says in the Torah that this happened, right? So The Torah is the, if you will, the source of where we get this dramatization. We dramatize it at Passover every year too. We actually are dramatizing it, right? So we're acting it out. We're reenacting it. But
I know there's not an answer to my question, but
the bigger answer is that it's in the Torah, and
yeah,
so
I know.
the rabbis have to. They have to deal with it. They want to deal with it. They want to deal with the fact that that this confrontation is an odd confrontation. It's a very odd confrontation. And again, we already gave us one answer, which is that he's relieving himself. This is the most intimate time for Pharaoh. Where again, the Pharaoh of all people, that guy should be able to decide when he gets to go to the bathroom in peace. So again, that's how Moses is catching him, because God is telling Moses when to go out and get him. What was interesting here too, I wanted to point out, was that, so we read one midrash that it's because he's going to the bathroom. There's this other midrash here which tells us he went to the waters because that's where he gets his power from. That was where he got his spell and enchantment and magical formulas from. He got the stuff from the Nile. Wow. That's a heavy thing to just spring on us, because what it means is that Pharaoh is one of the magicians himself, the Magi. Again, the term Magi is anachronistic. It's from a much later period. It's from the Babylonian and Persian period. It's where we get the word magic from, by the way, right? The Magi are the wise men, or that's what they're called in the story of Jesus. But it's a later term. But okay, it doesn't matter. The point is the rabbis are the ones who've now thrown a midrash out here, which is that Pharaoh is like those guys. He's been steeped in that culture and that knowledge, and he has it. And so when he goes out to the water, he's also working on his enchantments. He's also working on his magic. It's not just private time for him to go to the bathroom. The rabbis are actually saying that's where he does his sorcery. That's his moment of getting his powers together, which again kind of explains why Pharaoh was such a powerful guy, because he has access to these things, which, as we said, the rabbis don't say this is fake, this is staged, this is real. They believe that they indeed has supernatural power, which means Pharaoh has supernatural power, which, by the way, could be one of the reasons why he is stubborn and he doesn't believe this stuff, because he has powers. So Torah doesn't say that. The Torah doesn't say that Pharaoh has powers. The rabbis gave it to us, and they derived it from the fact that that's why he's down at the water. So again, not what you naturally or easily see. It's where they went. But it also explains why Pharaoh is as stubborn as he is, which is that he's got access to this stuff. He's got abilities that most people don't. So again, why is God not as impressive to Pharaoh? Because he can do stuff. All right. So we'll get into the fourth plague.
The warning of the plague that was imminent not having had any effect upon Pharaoh, God sent the fourth plague upon Egypt, a mixed horde of wild animals, lions, bears, wolves, and panthers, and so many birds of prey of different kinds that the light of the sun and the moon was darkened as they circled through the air. These beasts came upon the Egyptians as a punishment for desiring to force the seed of Abraham to amalgamate with the other nations. God retaliated by bringing a mixture upon them that cost them their life.
Okay, we've got to comment on what was that? Yeah, let's. So first of all, the word for the fourth plague is arov, which means a swarm. We read Wednesday, the Torah version that we were reading, and actually I'm going to show it to you right now. Let me get back to the fourth plague here in the Torah that we have, which is a good translation. The Sepharia translation, the one that we've been using, it's a good translation. I like it because it's got the Hebrew and English right with us. But here you go. And again, here's what we just read. Present yourself to Pharaoh in water, where he's going out there. If you do not let my people go, I will let loose a swarm of insects against you. Holy moly. That's not what it just said. It just said it's a swarm of animals. There's a difference in how that's translated. And folks, I got news for you. We don't know what these swarms were. We don't. What I'm telling you is that you could pick up a Haggadah that says swarms of insects for the fourth plagues, and you'll also pick up ones that say swarms of wild beasts or wild beasts. It won't even say swarms, it'll just say wild beasts as a fourth plague.
I have to say this, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
Right. We do that. That's occasionally will come out during the Seder. The problem is that some Haggadah don't actually say that. They say swarms of insects. The word arov literally just means swarms. So arov is can be translated different ways. By the way, I think some of the Haggadahs that I use, or we've used at the temple too, say wild beasts, or in parentheses, maybe, or insects. They'll give us both because they recognize that we're not really sure. And again, if you're saying, well, but doesn't the Torah help us understand it? Not really. Could be both, by the way. I throw out there that it could be insects and wild beasts. I think some people like that it's wild beasts because like the lice are kind of like insects, and maybe this is like a little different, or maybe the lice bugged the animals and the animals came out because they didn't like the lice. I mean, I don't really know if there's exact reason for it, but I'm going to tell you something. The rabbis went a whole different way here. Well, not a whole different way, but they picked up on the actual Hebrew word, which is arov. Folks, we have this word later on in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, when it says that a mixed multitude, arov rav, a mixed multitude of people left Egypt. The rabbis derive from that the people that left Egypt, when they left Egypt, were not just Jews. Or if they were Jewish, they were mixed together with other people. I will tell you that the rabbis sometimes go there with wasn't such a great thing that they were a mixed multitude when they left Egypt, that was part of the problem. Part of the reason why they're so problematic to Moses is that this is a mixed multitude of people. These aren't all pure Abraham people. But that's what it just said, folks. When it says here, these were a punishment for the seed of Abraham to amalgamate. Rosemary, what's that a fancy way of saying?
It's saying that they're forcing the Hebrews to intermarry or to breed with the other peoples.
Yeah. So I just want to pause. I just wanted to point that out. I want you to see what just happened. First of all, they blame the Egyptians for this mixed marriage. They blamed the Egyptians for the Israelites being mixed while they were in Egypt. That's what it said. I'm just saying what's here. I'm not endorsing this. I in no way want to connect myself to this line of discussion.
I know. I mean, there are people who don't want to live in a society where that happens.
I will tell you that the rabbis seem to have a problem with it.
Yes.
Though it doesn't surprise us, but I also will point out that it is possible that Abraham's descendants can amalgamate with each other. So therefore, an Israelite marrying a Midianite, which is what happened to Moses, folks, and that wasn't because of Pharaoh. Midianites are descendants of Abraham. So maybe amalgamating amongst themselves. When Jacob marries, his cousin Rachel and Leah, they are from not Abraham's descendants, but they're Abraham's relatives. Maybe that's not a problem. But marrying an Egyptian who's a descendant of Ham, also the ancestors of the Canaanites and ancestors of the people who got cursed by Noah, that might be a problem. It doesn't necessarily say anything about interacting with the descendants. I say interacting, amalgamating. I'm going to use that word from now on, amalgamating. They're not amalgamating. It doesn't say anything about them amalgamating with the descendants of Japhet, the ancestors of the Europeans. But here it could be anybody that's not even the seed of Abraham. So other Semites, other descendants of Shem, if they're not Abrahamic, maybe amalgamating with them isn't okay either. But wow. So the rabbis joined the word arov, which is the swarms, the mixed multitude. They joined the word there arov with the swarm of the plague, with the swarm of the people that leave Egypt as a mixed multitude, and they brought them together in the Midrash here, which is that the Pharaoh got punished for doing this by having swarms of beasts attack them. Folks, again, this is a play on words, but of course it gets to a bigger issue, which is this assimilation that happens to the Israelites in Egypt? Are there long-term consequences from this? And the rabbis definitely pick up on it, and the Torah picks up on it. So look, this isn't the only understanding of this. I want to point out there is another understanding that we'll read later on in a few weeks, that when the Israelites left Egypt, there were just average Egyptians who said, you know what? This God that just did these plagues is a really big God. That is the God that I'm going to attach myself to, and I'm going to go out with them. I'm changing sides, if you will, converting. I'm joining the winning team, which of course is a team that's now going to spend 40 years in the wilderness. But when they made the call, you could understand why. These guys are really powerful. So the mixed multitude may not have been by marriage. It could have just been people who attached themselves to the Israelites while they were in Egypt. Okay. But again, here's a possibility that this was a few generations of Israelites intermarrying amongst the people. By the way, I didn't call on you, Rosemary, to talk about amalgamation. I just knew what that word meant. But I didn't pick on you because you married a Gentile man. Very nice man.
Yes.
But you amalgamated and created a very wonderful family. So, but I didn't pick on you because of your amalgamation. But I'm going to use that from now on. That's my new word, at least amongst all of you. When we talk about amalgamating, but I shouldn't laugh, because the beasts, the hordes of beasts that came were not good. These were, if they're insects, that's not good, but wild beasts is really scary. And this is the way the rabbis thought that the wild beasts descended on the people.
As Pharaoh had been the first of the Egyptians to lay evil plans against the children of Israel, so he was the first upon whom descended punishment. Into his house the mixed horde of beasts came first of all, and then into the houses of the rest of the Egyptians. Goshen, the land inhabited by the Israelites, was spared entirely, for God put a division between the two peoples. It is true, the Israelites had committed sins enough to deserve punishment, but the Holy One, blessed be he, permitted the Egyptians to act as a ransom for Israel.
Yeah. So let's just mention what that means. This is the first plague, folks. The fourth plague is the first time that it doesn't say throughout the whole land of Egypt. Here on the fourth plague, For lice, it said throughout the land of Egypt, which, look, the rabbis could have interpreted, and some of them did, that the first 3 plagues affected everybody. Everybody. The Israelites were affected by lice too, that would mean, which they don't like saying that out loud, because that's punishing the victim, if you will, in their minds a little bit, and they don't like that, which okay. But this plague, it says, didn't go into the land of Goshen. It didn't affect the Israelites. And so this is the first time it says, God says, on that day I will set apart the region of Goshen where my people dwell, so that no swarms will be there, so that you may know that I am the Lord and are in the midst of the land. This is the first time. And so the rabbis point that out, but they point it out in a way that, again, they've kind of said the other plagues haven't affected the Israelites. It doesn't say that in the Torah. And that isn't the only, there are interpretations that the Israelites had to be affected by the first plagues too. They had to be. And again, the rabbis kind of just threw out there why, which is they had been sinning, that the Israelites deserved it, which I don't know how you can get much more blaming the victim here. I mean, the Midrash just said that they committed enough sins to deserve punishment. So, the possibilities that the Israelites themselves had fallen so low in their own behavior, they go there. I don't know what to tell you. The rabbis went there. The rabbis just went to the possibility that, yeah, the Israelites needed to be punished too. Or again, deserved it at the very least. So even if they're going to say, even if you're one of those people who would say, oh, they didn't get punished. They didn't get punished. The first 3 plagues didn't affect them. There is a rabbinic tradition that they deserved it. Again, assumedly because they were worshiping idols and they had given up on God. Which again, one can make the argument, can you blame them? This is the theology that we're dealing with, folks. This is what the rabbis gave out as a possibility. So the Egyptians suffer only now. That seems to be pretty clear. All right, here we go.
Again, Pharaoh expressed his willingness to let the children of Israel sacrifice to their God, but they were to stay in the land and do it, not to go outside into the wilderness. Moses pointed out to Pharaoh how unbecoming it would be for the Israelites to sacrifice before the very eyes of his people the animals that the Egyptians worshipped as gods. Then Pharaoh consented to let them go beyond the borders of his land, only they were not to go very far away, and Moses, to mislead him, asked for a 3 days' journey into the wilderness. But again, when Moses had entreated God on Pharaoh's behalf and the horde of wild beasts had vanished, the king hardened his heart and did not let the people go.
Yeah, and that so far is that is not really anything here that you don't already know. Other than, again, maybe an embellishment of why the 3 days. Now, how this plague came to an end, though.
The cessation of the 4th plague was as miraculous as the plague itself. The very animals that had been slain by the Egyptians in self-defense returned to life and departed from the land with the rest. This was ordained to prevent the wicked oppressors from profiting by the punishment, even so much as the value of the hides and the flesh of the dead animals. It had not been so with the useless frogs. They had died on the spot, and their carcasses had remained where they fell.
So
Well, it also made cleanup easier.
Yes.
Not so much time for cleanup after the
Well,
that plague.
dead frogs have no value. Dead
They're
frogs,
obviously not into frogs' legs.
no. Well, yeah, especially frogs that die.
Yeah.
You know,
Frog hide.
I don't want to get into how you kill frog. I don't even want to think about it. But yeah, that frogs have no value. But dead animals, you can use those normally for some really cool clothing, or maybe a nice fur coat.
A dead leopard would be quite valuable.
Yep. So we have a weird midrash, very weird. What I kind of like it actually in a way, because as a vegetarian and someone who doesn't, well, I'm a vegetarian largely because I don't want to cause pain to animals. The animals got killed by the Egyptians in self-defense. They had to kill them, otherwise they were going to get killed. But God let those animals come back to life and leave. That's pretty miraculous. And so they're saying that was even more miraculous. But they like that idea for a few reasons. Number one, kind of gets the animals out of a problem there, a little of a jam, if they are in fact wild animals. A lot of dead wild animals is very upsetting. It's upsetting to me, but it's also giving them a tremendous amount of value. Dead leopard skins are worth a whole, that's their dead leopards, and that's a value. So no, they didn't get any value. No, there's no value. You don't get to keep anything. These animals, you killed them, they came back to life, they left. It's like they weren't there, and they hurt you, and they attacked you, all this stuff. So this was bad. But there's not even an upside to it. Fifth plague is dever, which literally means disease. It's the same word that we would use to describe, one could use to describe a virus, the virus that we're dealing with right now. It's disease. The word dever literally means disease. Now, the Torah is pretty clear that this is a disease that affected the animals. But it was a really bad plague. And it says dever kaved me'od, which means a very serious pestilence. It says the hand of the Lord will strike your livestock in the fields, the horses, the asses, the camels, and the sheep. And again, Israelites, their animals don't get affected, which is crazy, by the way. That's again another one of those plagues that's just like, how did that happen? Because when animals start getting sick, they all get sick. And it's a disaster. I mean, having a disease.
Animals were vaccinated.
And we do actually, I mean, we vaccinate, and unfortunately we inject animals now, that, with antibiotics.
Yes.
It actually is a serious problem, many people think, because it will eventually create.
It creates antibiotic resistance.
Yeah. And so this is a problem, and it's something that we don't talk about. I talked about it in my sermon.
That's different than vaccinating.
Correct. But I will tell you that there is a problem, which is, again, behind all this, which is that when animals get sick, they all get sick, especially when they're in pens, and especially when they're all near each other, and it is a disaster. And when people have to put down animals that are sick, whether it's hoof and mouth disease or they'll have to just kill all the animals, because they won't kill all of them in a pen, even if not all of them are dead. It's a horrible thing because they don't.
In Sweden, was it?
Yeah. It is a disaster. And it's horrific to see. Horrific. it's one of the reasons why, again, I don't even like thinking about meat production, because people have no choice. They have to, they have to, they have to spare all the animals by killing a whole bunch of other animals, maybe even ones that aren't affected. So I don't know what to tell you other than on the face of it, this plague is bad. But well, let's read this other paragraph. Oh wait, no, sorry. No, it's in this paragraph. Sorry, I thought it was in the next paragraph.
The fifth-
Did you read this part?
Did we didn't read the fifth plague yet, did we?
Yeah. Oh, you didn't? Okay, sorry. So go. I can't even. Yeah.
The fifth plague inflicted by God upon the Egyptians was a grievous pestilence, which mowed down the cattle and beasts chiefly, yet it did not spare men altogether. This pestilence was a distinct plague, but it also accompanied all the other plagues, and the death of many Egyptians was due to it. The Israelites again came off unscathed. Indeed, if an Israelite had a just claim upon a beast held by an Egyptian, it too was spared, and the same good fortune waited upon such cattle as was the common property of Israelites and Egyptians.
Yeah. So let's talk about the more crazy part of that, which is that, look, in the reality is that in some cases, animals are owned by more than one person, right? They have partnership, right? And so they can both derive benefit from the same animal. So this Midrash actually tells us of livestock practices that people had in the old days, which is that maybe they had a herd and they shared it with a friend. They had the ownership, a common partnership, a company that they own together, if you will. Well, the interesting thing here is that and the Midrash tells us that if the animals were owned by, in common trust by an Israelite and Egyptian, the Israelite was able to have those animals spared because they owned it. Even if it was only partly owned by an Israelite, those animals were spared, which again makes the miracle, the plague, even more miraculous and more powerful. But what's so interesting about this is that the rabbis point out something that is part of the plague, which is the word dever means disease. It means pestilence. It means plague. It means a virus. All those things would have been, the word dever would have incorporated all those. And because the word can be used for all of them, it is possible that this plague, and the rabbis just threw it out there, didn't just kill animals, it also killed people. And that's why it says it did not spare men altogether. It chiefly affected them, but it also affected people. Now, it's a horrible plague because it affects animals that were transportation. They were the horses and camels. It was the animals for livestock and food production. I mean, this is affecting the Egyptians at every level of their society and their commerce. It's not one like an animal died and this was a disaster. This was all of their livestock is being affected, and it's affecting every aspect of their lives. Literally, it's not animals died, which is why this fifth plague is considered, by the way, according to the Midrash, and according it's in the Haggadah, that this plague, it says that this plague was really the whole force of God's hand. Why? Because it's also 5 fingers or 5, like a hand. So this is the hand of God, the fifth plague. But the word dever is the same word that we would use for pestilence. When we talk about the 4 horsemen, dever was one of the plagues. It was one of the 4 horsemen. So this is a really serious thing. It's not just, animals died. The rabbis knew that this was a serious thing because they lived in a time when livestock was everything. And again, it would literally be like you shut down the transportation system. So there's no more buses, there's no more food delivery. There's no more trucks. There's no more any communication. Postal service is down. Everything is down, and your animals died, so that you can't have milk and eggs and all of the things that you relied on for your food source. Again, even though they ate less animals, they ate animals back then. The food source is now just cut off. And you can't raise a cow overnight to give you milk and to give you food. It takes months, in some cases years, for an animal to be able to be bred and to be valuable as a means of production. So this is a horrific plague. There's not a whole lot about it in the Midrash, but it's pretty bad. And again, it is possible that the disease spread to people too, because it always does, folks. Not always.
It reminds me of closing restaurants. When you close a restaurant, it isn't just the restaurant, it's an incredible chain.
Yep. And I will tell you that this fifth plague is the one that speaks to us the most today. And it's interesting because this is the word that we would use to describe what we're dealing with right now, a dever, a plague. There is no better word. There's no more appropriate word. There's no word that we don't really have that many words in the Torah. It's limited vocabulary anyways. That would be what we are living with today. This plague. And again, to some extent, that is the word for, it's not the word magefa is the word we use for the plagues, but the plague of disease is dever. So if we were going to say what this is right now, this is dever, what we're living with now, and how it affects so many things beyond just health, the economy, our psychology, every aspect of our lives. It's just not disease and death, which is pretty bad now too. All right, sixth plague.
The sixth plague, the plague of boils, was produced by Moses and Aaron together in a miraculous way. Each took a handful of ashes of the furnace. Then Moses held the contents of the two heaps in the hollow of one of his hands and sprinkled the ashes tip toward the heaven, and it flew so high that it reached the divine throne. Returning earthward, it scattered over the whole land of Egypt, a space equal to 400 square parasangs. The small dust of the ashes produced leprosy upon the skin of the Egyptians and blains of a peculiar kind, soft within and dry on top.
Yeah, so this is the plague of boils, which again, lice affected the body. There's no question lice affects the body, but the lice are not the body. They're not your physical body. They bite you, they leave eggs on you, it's not fun, but they are independent of your body. Boils are not independent of the body. They are the body. They have now affected, the plagues have directly affected the body. Again, Midrash, the frogs came out of people's body, yes, no doubt, but not the actual anatomy of a person. This plague is different, and it affects the body. And it does say that Moses tossed the ashes up into the air, which is, again, a pretty miraculous and dramatic way of spreading this plague. So what does it also tell us about this plague?
The first 5 plagues the magicians had tried to imitate, and partly they had succeeded. But in this 6th plague, they could not stand before Moses, and thenceforth they gave up the attempt to do as he did. Their craft had all along been harmful to themselves. Although they could produce the plagues, they could not imitate Moses in causing them to disappear. They would put their hands into their bosom and draw them out white with leprosy, exactly like Moses. But their flesh remained leprous until the day of their death. And the same happened with all the other plagues that they imitated. Until their dying day, they were afflicted with the ills they produced.
Yeah, so this is tragic irony. The Egyptians can mimic and replicate these plagues, these dramatic things that Moses was doing. However, theirs didn't go away. Every time Moses undid the stuff, they couldn't undo their stuff. So is it humorous? I don't know if it's funny. It's not funny if you're one of them, but it's definitely ironic. And of course, as we already pointed out, what happens here after this sixth plague of boils?
As Pharaoh had wittingly hardened his heart with each of the first 5 plagues and refused to turn from his sinful purpose, God punished him thereafter in such wise that he could not mend his ways if he would. God said, even though he should desire to do penance now, I will harden his heart until he pays off the whole of his debt.
Yeah. So as the rabbis point out, Pharaoh, we usually don't use the word wittingly. We only use the word unwittingly, but wittingly is the word. So
We'd say knowingly.
yeah. Pharaoh hardens his own heart up until now.
Mhm.
The first 5 plagues, Pharaoh's hardening his heart. But something else happens here now, which is that now he can't, even when he wants to. God won't let him. So there is a break here. And there's a lot of things that, like, these plagues were done by Moses, these ones were done by Aaron, these ones are in the water, these ones, there's a lot of ways that we classify plagues. There's another issue here too, which is that it seems as though there's now a plague differential, which is now Pharaoh doesn't have a choice. He is not able to change, to get off this disastrous collision course with God. That God is basically now not let him, he can't stop. And in this game, again, to use this analogy, in this game of chicken, he's going straight forward. He can't get off. And so it is what it is, folks. I mean, the first 7 plagues actually, interestingly, are part of the portion we read last week, Vayera. This week, we're actually reading the next set of plagues. But so there is that break too, which is not really a break in the Torah. So we have one more week that we're going to be reading the last half of the plagues. But as you can see from what we were reading today, the rabbis definitely have a lot to derive from the plagues. In a couple months, we're going to be reading this at Passover. As you may know, Passover is kind of early this year. It's the end of March. You probably will be thinking about the plagues a little bit differently. We thought about the plagues last year in the middle of the beginning of COVID because we were in the beginning of a pandemic. And, there's a lot of talk around the table that next year, that we won't be living with this. It seems as though hopefully many of us will be vaccinated. I hope as many as possible will be vaccinated in the next 2 months. But there's no doubt that we're going to be still very much living within the reality of this plague right now.
Yeah, I made appointments for Mary at Six Flags on Friday, and there's plenty of appointments.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for.
I had one for me. I don't know if they're going to let me do it since I have an underlying condition, but I tried. I'm going to try anyways.
Well, thank you, and I hope they do. I hope you hope you're able to get in there and
Do you still want to talk to Mary after this?
I do. Is she going out right now?
No, she's back. They lost power at her dentist office.
All right. Well, I just wanted to call her, but I want to talk about.
You want to do it here?
Related. No, well, no, I'll call. I'll call right now.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say, folks, is that yeah, we already know that we're already working on it. We're going to be doing Passover online again this year, but we are going to be able to provide meals again as we did this last year. We delivered about 150 Passover
That really
meals.
worked out last year.
We're going to do it again. Well, we didn't deliver it. We had people pick it up.
Yeah.
But if we need to deliver it, we will. But again, there's a not a finality. That's not the right word. There's a very sad reality that we're going to have to deal with this again this Passover too. So
Yeah,
I
who knew?
don't like having to tell people that. And I mean, as I said, this is just the reality of what we're dealing with, folks. So please stay healthy. God willing, next week, some of you will tell me that you got vaccinated. We're trying to help people any way we can facilitate that. If people need rides, I'm actually getting calls right now from some people we are trying to encourage to get and to help them do it. But everybody, please stay healthy, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay, everybody? Be well. Thanks, everybody, for coming on.
Bye.
And stay healthy.